Welcome. Once again, one of Tony Heller's brainwashed trolls came over to my channel pointing to a recent video by Tony Heller saying, "Debunk this if you can." Well, it turns out it was easy peasy. The video in question was called Goodbye New York, Goodbye Washington. It should have been called Goodbye Truth. He uses selected extracts from letters and newspaper clippings. Now they're very selected and don't tell the whole story. He uses these clippings to prove that climate science models and predictions are nonsense, which of course they aren't. And he seems to relish at one point in the video the death and destruction that would happen if Washington and New York went underwater. Of course, they'd probably mostly be Democrats, so it wouldn't really matter, at least to his way of thinking. But he seems to forget about what happened with Hurricane Sandy and his most recent storm that killed so many people in New York when water inundated the city.
A few weeks after we landed on the moon in 1969, presidential advisor Daniel Moynihan turned his attention to a different celestial body. He wrote a letter to John Ehrlichman of Watergate fame. In his letter, he warned of 7 degrees warming by the year 2000 and 10 feet of sea level rise. Goodbye, New York. Goodbye, Washington. But unfortunately, 20 years after his deadline, Washington is still there.
He starts off by discussing the contents of a letter from Patrick Moynihan to John Ehrlichman, both presidential advisors to President Nixon, and then points out that the temperature and carbon dioxide estimates in the letter are wrong. Moynihan points out there's going to be a 25% increase in carbon dioxide by 2000, and that could result in a 7 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees centigrade increase in global temperatures. And indeed, those numbers are wrong. For example, let's take a look at the carbon dioxide numbers. In 1969, when the Moynihan letter was written, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 320 parts per million. By 2000, the number had increased to about 365 parts per million. That's a 14% increase in those years. Now we come to the part that Tony Heller didn't mention. In the very next paragraph, Moynihan talks about countervailing effects, such as the rise in carbon dioxide, which would mask, if not overwhelm, the cooling effects of these aerosols. The primary purpose of the letter is in the last paragraph, which states that we don't have enough data of the right sort to be drawing public policy. We need to get more data. So this is largely an irrelevant letter between two advisors to President Nixon talking about the possibility of getting a larger database so they can formulate public policy.
In the following year, the United States and Soviet Union were worried about a different problem. The United States and the Soviet Union are mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate is becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice have recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. Climate experts wanted to spread coal dust over the Arctic ice pack in order to melt it and save us from global cooling.
Once again, he is pushing an article from a newspaper, not any scientific study. He uses the old magician's trick of, say, look here. And he talks on the right here about a hypothesis that is completely unlikely and has no relevance to the real issue. But what he doesn't say is, look here, which shows that this really is all about the competition for control of the Arctic during the height of the Cold War between Russia and the US. They point out that there's gold, oil, the potential for very profitable shipping routes, and also military usage, which is the passage of their nuclear attack submarines through the Arctic seas. Next, he goes on to talk about a Washington Post article by an S.I. Rasool. Note he doesn't show the paper by Rasool, and it only shows the headline from the Washington Post. Why? Let's hear first what Heller had to say.
And the following year, NASA's leading climate expert predicted a new ice age in as little as 50 or 60 years. If he's correct, we're going to have a new ice age sometime in the next few weeks.
He claims, rather boldly, that Rasool was NASA's leading climate scientist in 1971. That is not true. Rasool was working on atmospheric problems for Venus, not Earth, but he chose to apply the equations that he put together for scattering in Venus's atmosphere to the Earth situation. In fact, Rasool did not join the Earth Sciences Division of NASA until 1977, 6 years after this article was published. So let's actually see what the article has to say about all of this. So what did Heller not tell you about this article? If you look at his paper, you'll see that Rasool's model was for a 4-fold increase in sulfur dioxide. And of course, that didn't happen. At the time, there was concern about sulfur dioxide. Its concentration had reached 35 nanograms per gram, as you can see from the chart in the bottom right here. And it had been increasing relatively rapidly for the last 70 years. But now, after the Clean Air Act, that number drops to 10 nanograms per gram. So it is dropped by about a factor of 4 rather than increasing by a factor of 4. Also in Rasool's paper, in the second paragraph, he talks about how the effect of carbon dioxide heating will actually counteract this aerosol cooling effect. Again, Heller forgets to mention this. I wonder why. Lastly, Heller introduces a letter from a group of scientists to Nixon. Let's hear what he has to say.
And a year later, in 1972, 42 top American and European investigators wrote a letter to President Nixon giving some different advice from Moynihan. Moynihan said that the world was going to burn up and drown, but these 42 top investigators said we were all going to freeze.
Once again, he's giving us only part of the story. It says it was a letter from 42 leading climate scientists. It was not. It was a letter from 2 scientists trying to describe the outcome of a meeting of 42 scientists. The other ones did not sign the letter. What was the result of this letter? Basically nothing. The letter was circulated from department to department, and it ended up in a food fight between NASA, NOAA, and NSF as to who was going to chair the resulting committee to look into this. Well, what can we conclude from this? The video went on for some more minutes, but it goes on and on and on in much the same way, with no improvement in the quality or the quantity of argument. There's very little science and much reliance on third-party interpretation of scientific results, which by definition are unreliable. Newspapers are not known for their scientific accuracy or understanding, so don't rely on them to make a point. Go to the paper that they are actually reporting on and read that first. And read all of what the paper says, not just the bits that you prefer to look at. Letters between politicians are even less reliable. They're trying to make some political advantage from what they are talking about and therefore have biased opinions. And most of them are not founded in any science. There are very few scientists or anybody with any scientific training in politics. I keep coming back to the question, why is Heller distorting what is said 50 years ago? Perhaps it's because he has nothing more recent to support his arguments. So if you are a Heller supporter, suitably brainwashed by his sappy voice, please keep your comments to his channel and don't come over to mine and challenge me to sort this out or try to explain this, because I will. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.